The first serious fight my wife and I ever had was not about love. It was not about family, or values, or any of the things people assume break relationships apart. It was about a credit card bill I had not told her about. We had been married for 7 months. We were combining finances for the first time. One joint checking account, one shared view of where the money actually went. She opened the statement on a Tuesday evening while I was making dinner. The balance on a card she did not know existed was $4,200. The card had been open for 3 years. I had been making minimum payments the entire time. She did not yell. That would have been easier. She sat very quietly at the kitchen table and looked at the statement for a long time. Then she looked at me. The question she asked was not about the money. It was about what else she did not know. That question is the real subject of this video. Not the debt. Not the credit card. Not even the fight that followed. The question underneath it, what else do I not know about the person I am building my life with, is the one that determines whether two people's financial lives are going to work together over decades or gradually separate into two parallel systems that never quite align and quietly generate conflict for years without either person fully understanding why. My name is David, and today I am going to show you every conversation about money that couples in their 20s and 30s consistently do not have, exactly why they do not have it, what it costs when they do not, and a specific structure for having it. Not the version that turns into a fight, the version that actually moves things forward. Let me start with what the research shows because the picture is more specific than most people realize. The American Psychological Association has tracked the relationship between money and relationship conflict for over a decade. Their annual Stress in America survey consistently finds that money is the leading source of conflict in relationships, above parenting differences, above communication problems, above any other category. Not occasionally, consistently, year after year, across income levels, education levels, and relationship lengths. What that statistic obscures is the more important finding underneath it. The conflict is almost never actually about money. It is about what the money represents. It is about different assumptions that were never made explicit, different fears that were never named, different values that were operating silently beneath every spending decision either person made. The money is the surface. The invisible assumptions are the structure. Kansas State University published research in 2012 examining thousands of couples and found that arguing about money was the top predictor of divorce. A stronger predictor than arguments about children, sex, in-laws, or any other category. The specific reason was not the frequency of money arguments. It was that money arguments took longer to recover from, involved more criticism and contempt, and left more residue than arguments about any other topic. The reason money arguments carry more weight is not that money is more important than other relationship dimensions. It is that money arguments are almost never actually about money. They are about security, about control, about who is trusted with what, about what kind of future each person is building toward, about whether the person across from you shares your fundamental assumptions about how a life should be organized financially. When those assumptions have never been made explicit and a conflict surfaces, both people are arguing about everything simultaneously, and neither person can name what they are actually fighting about. The couples who navigate money well over decades are not the ones who never disagree about it. They are the ones who made the invisible visible before the conflict forced it into the open. There are 7 specific conversations that research and the experience of financial planners who work with couples consistently identify as the ones that do not get had. Each of them sounds simple from the outside. Each of them is more complicated than it appears when you are actually sitting across from the person you love and trying to have it. The first conversation is about the number, not a budget number, the actual net worth number, combined. Most couples who have been together for several years, including many who are married, cannot tell you with precision what their combined net worth is at this moment. They have a general sense, roughly what each person earns, roughly what each person has saved, a general impression of the debt picture. But precision matters here in a way that general impressions do not support. Net worth is assets minus liabilities. Assets include every bank account, every retirement account, every investment account, any real property, any equity position in a business, and any other asset of meaningful value. Liabilities include every debt, student loans, auto loans, mortgage balances, credit card balances, personal loans, any money owed to family members, any outstanding tax liability. When couples calculate this number together for the first time, they consistently report two things. The first is that the number is different from what they expected. Sometimes better, sometimes significantly worse, but rarely exactly what either person had assumed. The second is that the process of calculating it revealed things neither person knew about the other's financial situation that mattered. The credit card I had not told my wife about was not the only thing the combined net worth calculation revealed. There was also a retirement account from a previous employer I had never rolled over, a small investment account I had opened and forgotten about, and a pattern of minimum payments on two cards over several years that had produced almost no reduction in principal despite significant total payments. None of these were secrets in the sense of deliberate concealment. They were just things I had never organized into a coherent picture and shared with another person who now had a direct stake in that picture. The combined net worth number is the financial foundation of a shared life. Building anything on a foundation you have not clearly examined is how structures develop unexpected weaknesses later. The second conversation is about the money story, where each person learned what they know about money and what they were taught, explicitly or implicitly, about what money means. This conversation sounds like therapy, and most people avoid it for exactly that reason. It is actually the most practically useful conversation on this list because it explains behavior in a way that no budget conversation ever will. Here is the reality. Every adult's relationship with money was shaped by childhood. Not partially, substantially. The household you grew up in established a baseline assumption about money that operates as background noise beneath every financial decision you make as an adult, often without your conscious awareness. If you grew up in a household where money was scarce, where the last week of the month involved genuine calculation about whether the bills would be covered, where financial fear was a regular ambient experience, you developed a specific relationship with money. That relationship might manifest as extreme frugality. Saving feels like safety. Spending feels like danger. Or it might manifest as the opposite. A learned helplessness around money. A sense that accumulation is impossible for people like you. An unconscious sabotaging of savings because security never felt real in the first place. If you grew up in a household where money was never discussed, where it was considered private, or vulgar to mention, or simply not part of the family's conversational life, you absorbed that norm. You may now find money conversations uncomfortable, not because of any specific trauma, but because silence was the model. If you grew up watching parents fight about money, you may have learned that money conversations lead to conflict, and the avoidance of money conversations is how peace is maintained. That lesson, internalized at 8 or 10 or 12 years old, is still running quietly in your relationship today. The clinical term for these inherited patterns is financial scripts, automatic beliefs about money inherited from the environment we grew up in that operate below conscious awareness. Dr. Brad Klontz, a financial psychologist whose research has been published in the Journal of Financial Therapy and elsewhere, has identified 4 primary financial script patterns: money avoidance, the belief that money is bad, or that wealthy people are corrupt; money worship, the belief that more money will solve all problems and produce happiness; money status, the conflation of financial worth with personal worth; and money vigilance, a strong emphasis on saving and financial privacy that can shade into excessive anxiety. Most people have a primary financial script that governs their instinctive responses to financial situations. Most couples have 2 different primary scripts that interact in ways neither person fully understands. A money-vigilant partner And a money worship partner will approach nearly every spending decision from fundamentally different emotional positions without ever naming the difference. Their conflict about whether to book the vacation or contribute that money to savings is not actually a conflict about the vacation. It is a conflict between two inherited belief systems about what money is for and what it means about a person's worth and security. The money story conversation does not require a therapist. It requires two people sitting down and answering a small number of specific questions. What was money like when you were growing up? What did your parents say about money, explicitly, or through their behavior? What did you learn about saving, about spending, about debt, about wealth? What does financial security feel like to you? What is the number or the condition that makes you feel safe? What does financial risk feel like? Is there a version of it that feels exciting, or does all of it feel like danger? These questions, asked with genuine curiosity rather than judgment, produce information that explains years of otherwise puzzling behavior. And they make the implicit explicit in a way that allows both people to negotiate from a shared map rather than two separate maps neither person has ever shown the other. The third conversation is about who manages what and whether that arrangement reflects a deliberate decision or an accident of circumstance. In most long-term relationships, a financial management structure develops organically. One person handles the bills. One person tracks the accounts. One person does the taxes. One person manages the investment accounts. The division happens gradually, usually based on who volunteered first, or who expressed interest, or who happened to have the credentials logged in on the shared computer, and it becomes permanent without either person consciously deciding it should be. The problem with accidental financial structures is twofold. First, they typically produce significant information asymmetry. One person knows the financial picture in detail, and the other operates on a general impression. That asymmetry creates dependency and vulnerability. If the partner who manages everything becomes incapacitated, dies, or leaves, the other partner is left with a financial life they do not fully understand and no roadmap for managing it. Second, accidental structures tend to reflect power imbalances that neither partner chose and neither is fully aware of. And those imbalances surface under stress in ways that generate conflict without either person understanding its source. The specific conversation needed is not just who does what. It is whether both people have sufficient access and understanding that either person could manage the complete picture if they needed to. This means both people know every account that exists, both people know where every account is held and how to access it, both people have the credentials, both people have a working understanding of the overall financial structure, and both people have been involved enough in financial decisions to have independent judgment about the major choices. This does not require both people to be equally interested in financial management. One partner can be the primary day-to-day manager, without the other being financially uninformed. It requires that the less engaged partner be informed and capable, not merely trusting that the more engaged partner has it handled. There is also a conversation to have about financial autonomy within a shared structure. Most couples benefit from some version of individual spending money, an amount each person can spend without discussion or justification. The appropriate amount varies significantly by income and shared expenses, and finding it requires explicit negotiation rather than assumption. But the principle is important. Two adults in a long-term relationship need some financial autonomy to avoid a dynamic where every purchase is evaluated by both people, which produces resentment reliably regardless of who is doing the evaluating. The fourth conversation is about the number that represents financial security, specifically what that number is for each person and how it was determined. This is the conversation where most couples discover they have been operating with completely different assumptions about what enough looks like. One partner might feel secure with 3 months of expenses in a savings account. The other might need 12 months before the background anxiety quiets. One might define financial security as a specific retirement account balance. The other might define it as owning the home outright. Neither definition is objectively correct. Both definitions drive behavior, often invisibly, in ways that create friction. A woman named Simone, 34, told me about a recurring argument with her partner that lasted for 3 years before they identified what it was actually about. Every time they approached a savings milestone, 6 months of expenses, then 8 months, then 10 months, he would suggest using some of the surplus for something they both wanted. A trip, a piece of furniture, a home improvement project. Every time she would feel a tightening in her chest that she could not fully articulate, and that he read as financial rigidity or a lack of enjoyment in their shared life. What Simone eventually understood, through a conversation prompted by a financial planner, was that her security number was not 3 months or 6 months or even 10 months. It was her parents' story. Her parents had lost their home in a foreclosure when she was 11 years old. The experience had established in her, at a foundational level, that financial security could disappear suddenly and without warning, and that the only protection was an amount large enough that even a major financial shock could not reach the bottom of the reserve. Her husband grew up in a household where money was plentiful and reliable, and the idea of a 10-month emergency fund felt not like security, but like hoarding. They were not fighting about the trip. They were operating from two entirely different lived experiences of what money's presence or absence means, and neither had ever said that out loud. The security number conversation requires both people to articulate not just the number but the reasoning behind it. Where did this number come from? What experience or belief or fear is it connected to? What would change if you had this amount versus what would stay the same? The answers are almost always more informative than the number itself. The fifth conversation is about financial goals, not in the vague aspirational sense, but with a level of specificity that makes them actionable. Most couples have had some version of the goal conversation. We want to buy a house. We want to retire comfortably. We want to travel. We want to pay off debt. These are not goals. These are categories. A goal has a number, a timeline, and an identified monthly funding requirement. Without those three elements, the goal is a wish, and wishes do not compete effectively with the present moment appeal of spending. The goal conversation that actually changes behavior involves sitting down together and listing every financial objective either person holds, assigning a target dollar amount to each one, assigning a target timeline to each one, and calculating the monthly savings rate required to reach each one. Then looking at the combined monthly savings requirement and comparing it to the actual monthly savings capacity. This calculation almost always reveals one of two things. Either the goals are achievable with the current savings rate, which is information that reinforces the behavior and makes the constraint feel meaningful rather than arbitrary, or the goals exceed the current savings capacity, which requires a specific conversation about prioritization. Which goal comes first? Which gets funded partially? Which gets pushed back in time? And which might be reconsidered entirely? The prioritization conversation is where values become visible in a practical way. Two people who both say they want to retire early and buy a house and fund their children's education and travel extensively and carry no debt will discover when they run the monthly math that those goals in combination may require a savings rate that exceeds what they currently earn. The decision about which ones get funded first and which ones yield reveals more about each person's actual values than any abstract values conversation will. A man named Wesley, 31, described doing this exercise with his partner for the first time after 4 years together. They listed 12 financial goals between them. The monthly savings requirement to fund all 12 on their chosen timelines was approximately $4,000 per month. Their combined take-home was $6,800. After fixed expenses, they had approximately $1,400 of actual monthly discretionary capacity. They had never looked at those three numbers together before. The gap between what they wanted and what was currently possible produced one of the most useful conversations they had ever had. Not because it was comfortable, but because it made the actual choices visible in a way that allowed them to make them deliberately, rather than by default. The sixth conversation is about debt, all of it, specifically including the debt that feels embarrassing. There is a specific category of financial secret in relationships that is so common it has a name in the financial planning literature: financial infidelity. Defined as concealing financial information from a partner, undisclosed debt, hidden accounts, secret spending, financial infidelity is reported in surveys by approximately 41% of Americans who have combined finances with a partner. 41%. Nearly half of all couples in which finances are shared have at least one partner concealing meaningful financial information from the other. The concealment is almost never strategic malice. It is almost always shame. Debt, especially consumer debt, credit cards, personal loans, debt accumulated through a period of poor decision-making or financial crisis, carries shame that makes disclosure feel genuinely threatening. The person carrying the hidden debt is not primarily thinking about the money. They are thinking about what the other person will think of them when they find out. They are protecting an image of financial competence that the disclosure would damage. They are afraid, usually accurately, that the conversation will be difficult. The irony is that the concealment itself, when it is eventually discovered, as it almost always is, does far more damage to the relationship than the original debt. The discovery of hidden debt does not primarily produce anger about the money. It produces a question about trust that is much harder to resolve than any specific financial problem. The question my wife asked me that Tuesday evening, "What else do I not know?" is not a question about $4,200. It is a question about whether the entire picture she has built of our shared life is accurate, and if it is not accurate in this dimension, what other dimension she might be misreading. The debt conversation needs to be had, and it needs to be complete. Every credit card balance, every student loan outstanding, every auto loan, every personal loan, any money owed to family members, any back taxes, any collections, any co-signed debt that could affect the household if the primary borrower defaults, all of it on the table as numbers before any plan is made. A woman named Renee, 29, had this conversation with her partner 2 years into their relationship when they began talking about buying a home together. She disclosed student loan debt she had described as approximately $30,000 when it was actually $62,000. Not a rounding error. A deliberate underdisclosure, maintained through vague references and changed subjects for 2 years. When she disclosed the actual number, she expected the relationship to end. It did not end. But the recovery took significantly longer than the original disclosure would have, and the trust rebuilt more slowly than either person wanted, because the question underneath, "Is there anything else?" does not fully resolve quickly. The disclosure conversation is not comfortable, it is necessary, and having it proactively, before it is extracted by circumstance, changes its entire character. A partner who discloses a difficult financial truth voluntarily is demonstrating something different from a partner who conceals until discovery. The voluntary disclosure is an act of trust. The discovery of concealment is an act of trust broken. The seventh conversation is about what happens if the relationship ends. This is the conversation almost nobody has, and the one that, in the absence of a clear agreement, can turn the dissolution of a relationship into a financial catastrophe. Prenuptial agreements carry significant cultural baggage. The assumption that having one signals an expectation of failure, a lack of romantic commitment, a mercenary attitude toward love. That framing is both historically and practically inaccurate. A prenuptial agreement is a legal document that establishes in advance, when both parties are rational and operating in good faith, and not in the middle of emotional crisis, how shared and individual assets will be treated if the relationship ends. It is the financial equivalent of a will. Nobody thinks having a will means you expect to die soon, or that you are not committed to living a long life. It is simply an acknowledgement that the future is uncertain and that having a plan for that uncertainty is responsible. The conversation about what happens if the relationship ends is valuable, even when it does not result in a legal document. The conversation itself forces both people to identify which assets they consider individual, which they consider shared, what they each believe is fair in terms of division, and what assumptions each person is operating under about the financial implications of the relationship's continuation. A couple named Tobias and Amani spent 8 months discussing this question after deciding to marry. Tobias had built a small business before they met that was worth approximately $200,000 at the time of their marriage. Amani had no meaningful assets, but expected her income to grow significantly over the next decade in her field. They disagreed substantially about several things: whether Tobias's business equity should be treated as premarital separate property, or whether its appreciation during the marriage should be shared, how they wanted to handle income disparity, if one of them left the workforce to care for children, what would happen to a house they planned to purchase together if they separated after 5 years versus after 20. The conversation was not comfortable, but having it before they were married, with both people emotionally present and operating from goodwill, produced a clear written understanding that both of them found fair. Having the same conversation after a marriage collapsed would have produced lawyers, adversarial positions, and outcomes neither person would have found acceptable. The specific content of this conversation depends on the assets involved, the income differential, the presence of children, the jurisdiction, and many other factors that make professional legal advice genuinely useful here. What does not depend on those factors is the value of having the conversation at all. Now I want to give you a specific structure for having these conversations, because knowing they need to happen and knowing how to actually start them are completely different problems. The reason most couples do not have these conversations is not that they do not know the conversations are important. It is that the conversations have no natural entry point in daily life. They feel high stakes enough that starting them incorrectly can produce defensiveness that derails them before they produce anything useful, and there is no shared language or framework that makes them feel manageable. Here is what works. Schedule the conversation as a scheduled event, not an opportunistic one. The worst possible version of a money conversation is one that starts when one partner notices something concerning: a bank statement, a credit card bill, a discrepancy in what was said versus what the numbers show. That context activates defensiveness immediately. A money conversation scheduled in advance, framed as a regular and neutral part of managing a shared financial life, has a fundamentally different emotional character. It is not an accusation or an investigation. It is a maintenance activity that both people have agreed to participate in. Start with the net worth number. Not because it is the most emotionally important conversation, but because it is the most concrete and the least likely to activate defensiveness. It is a factual exercise. List the assets, list the liabilities, subtract, arrive at a number. Doing this together before any evaluative conversation gives both people a shared map to look at together rather than each looking at the other. Build from fact to meaning. The net worth number is fact. What each person feels about that number, whether it produces pride or shame or anxiety or relief, is meaning. Moving from the factual to the emotional level deliberately, rather than having the emotional content arrive unexpectedly in the middle of a factual conversation, keeps the conversation on track. Use the money story questions as an early rather than late conversation. Most couples treat the deeper emotional history around money as something to save for when the relationship is comfortable enough to handle it. The research suggests the opposite structure works better. Having the money story conversation early, when both people are curious about each other and the relationship is not yet carrying the weight of unresolved financial conflict, produces the most productive outcomes. It is easier to hear that your partner grew up in financial fear and has a security number driven by that experience when you are learning about them, than when you are in the middle of a disagreement about whether the emergency fund is large enough. Agree on a structure before discussing the numbers. Before you look at any account balance or debt figure together, agree explicitly on what the purpose of the conversation is. It is to build a shared picture. It is not to evaluate each other's past decisions. Agreeing on that framing in advance, even saying it out loud before the numbers appear, significantly reduces the likelihood that the conversation turns into a retrospective judgment of one person's financial history. A man named Calvin, 36, described the money conversation he had with his partner before they moved in together as the most important conversation they have ever had. They spent 4 hours over 2 evenings going through the complete picture, combined net worth calculation, money story questions, goal prioritization, the what-if conversation. By the end of it, they had made 3 specific decisions that changed both of their financial behaviors. They combined emergency funds into one account that met both of their security thresholds. They established a monthly automatic transfer into a house down payment account that funded the goal on a specific timeline. And they each retained a personal spending account with an agreed monthly amount that neither person was required to justify to the other. Those 3 structural decisions came directly from 4 hours of conversation neither of them had expected to be comfortable, and both of them found to be significantly more productive than they anticipated. Let me now address the most common reason couples give for not having these conversations, because the reason is real and it deserves a direct response rather than dismissal. The reason is, I am afraid of what I will find out. This fear takes 2 forms. The first is external. I am afraid of what my partner will reveal. Debt I did not know about. Savings behavior I did not expect. Financial values that are different enough from mine to constitute a genuine incompatibility. The second form is internal. I am afraid of what my partner will find out about me. The credit card balance. The retirement account I never opened properly. The pattern of spending I have not fully examined. The ways in which my financial life does not match the version of myself I have presented. Both fears are legitimate. Both fears describe a real risk, that the conversation will reveal something that changes the relationship. And both fears point to the same answer. The information exists whether you have the conversation or not. The debt is there. The pattern is there. The divergent assumption is operating. The only variable the conversation controls is whether you are aware of it. And awareness, even of difficult things, almost always produces better outcomes than unawareness. Because unawareness does not prevent the problem from developing, it just prevents both people from addressing it before it grows. The couples who describe money as a source of chronic conflict in their relationships are almost never the ones who had difficult money conversations early. They are the ones who avoided the difficult conversations and watched the unaddressed issues compound over years. The way debt compounds, quietly and reliably, until the balance is significantly larger than it needed to be. My name is David. The credit card bill my wife found 7 months into our marriage was $4,200. The fight that followed was not primarily about the money. It was about the question underneath it. What else do I not know? We answered that question over 2 evenings the following week. We sat at the kitchen table with every account, every balance, every debt, every retirement statement, and we built a complete picture together for the first time. The picture was not comfortable. There were numbers on my side that I was not proud of. There were numbers on her side that surprised me in ways I had not expected. At the end of the second evening, we had a combined net worth number, a complete debt list with payoff priority and timeline, a shared emergency fund target that reflected both of our security thresholds, and 3 specific automatic transfers that would begin with the following paycheck. We also had, for the first time, a genuine understanding of where each of us came from financially and why each of us responded to money the way we did. The fight about the credit card bill was the worst financial conversation we had. It was also the one that made every subsequent financial conversation possible. If this gave you something specific to do this week, hit the like button now. The next video covers the exact structure for a monthly money conversation, the 30-minute check-in that replaces the annual fight and the specific agenda that makes it productive rather than defensive. One question for the comments. Have you and your partner ever had a complete combined net worth conversation, not an estimate, the actual number with every account on the table? Drop yes or no below. The ratio of answers tells me exactly what this community needs next.